Whoops, I'm on the wrong slide. Sorry. Okay, we just finished here with the war. One of the big events that comes out of this is the Holocaust. Why was the Holocaust able to kill 12 million people? Well, first of all, the Ottoman Turks, back during World War I, had set up the example with the Armenian genocide. You'll notice here's Turkey, and the Armenians lived out in this part, out here where the heavy red dots are. Um, and out here in Armenia, you see Armenia, and they right here, and they set the example. Concentration camps, um, long death marches, and planned systematic killing of people. It was horrific. It was carried out by the state. What I mean by that is the government's involved. The Nazis were highly organized and highly efficient at wiping people out. Very, very efficient. Very good at it. Next up, we've got, it was essentially allowed by occupied countries. What I mean is, they took over France. The French aided the Nazis in rounding up Jews. In Holland, they aid them. If you've read the book Anne Frank, you know that. Locals helped turn the Jews over. In Eastern Europe, they helped turn the Jews over. It's really only the people of Denmark, the Danes, and the Italians who resisted in any large degree and systematic degree. The people of those countries resisted. The Danes, people of Denmark, were very kind to their Jews. In fact, they helped slip them across in fishing boats into Sweden. Sweden was a neutral country during the war and helped slip them across to Sweden and then maintain their homes. And there are stories of Jews coming home, and when they come home after the war, the Danes had actually cleaned their houses and kept their yards up and kept their homes in great shape. So they were well treated by them. Number 4, Allied countries, and the United States is one of those, refused Jewish immigrants and refugees. Now, we took on some people like Einstein and some of the great scientists, but shortly before the war, there was a ship that left Europe full of Jewish people trying to immigrate to the United States. Actually, they went to Cuba first, got turned down there, got turned down in the United States, and the United States sent the ship back to Europe. Of the people in that ship, I think it's 2/3 to 3/4 of them die in concentration camps. So even countries like the U.S. contribute. And then our intelligence, military intelligence, had realized that this was going on and what Hitler was doing, but they didn't attack the railway lines or the extermination camps. The argument was, if you twofold. If you attack the extermination camps, you'll kill the Jewish prisoners. Well, they were probably going to die anyway. And argument number 2 was, the faster we end this war, the faster we can stop the killing of the Jews. So there was a feeling that we cannot divert resources to this effort. All right, so the encirclement and the end of the 12-year Reich. Remember, Hitler had called it the 1,000-year Reich, but it only lasted about 12 years. Primarily, the United States only supplies England under what we call the Lend-Lease program. You're going to learn more about the Lend-Lease program next year. But Roosevelt supplies a lot of armaments to, sorry, I got interrupted there for just a second. But the U.S., back to the topic at hand, U.S. was supplying Britain. We were very, Roosevelt was, FDR was very opposed to Hitler. He hated Hitler and was very sympathetic to the British. Really wanted us into the war, but did not have the public support at that time. U.S. was still pretty isolationist as it related to Europe. Still pretty isolationist as it related to Europe. But Pearl Harbor changes all that. You'll look out here on the map down here. We got the Hawaiian Islands. Our forces here at Hawaii and then later at Midway, the Battle of Midway, we had put embargo on Japan, had tried to cut off their ability to make steel. We weren't able to do that so much because they were still able to get some raw materials from their colonies, but we were trying, and that really reduced the the amount of steel they could use. And they felt that eventually they were going to have to fight the United States anyway. So they attacked Hawaii in 1941, December 7th, 1941. We enter the war, declare war on Japan. Germany promptly makes it easy for us by declaring war on us, and then we're in the war full scale. We're in it both directions. All right. So what did we do? First off, at 41, we'll spend 42 building up to the war. We are going to send tank divisions and infantry. We first join, at least in the European theater, in North Africa. We'll join the forces against the Italians and the Germans in North Africa. And then we'll attack Sicily in Italy, and eventually we topple Mussolini and assassinate him. That's him hanging upside down with one of his mistresses after he was killed. And finally, at least as far as the Soviets are concerned, the Russians are concerned, finally in 1944, of June of 1944, we open a Western Front with our invasion of Normandy. The Russians are upset, and they feel like they really wanted us to open up the war in France on Germany much earlier because they felt it had allowed the Germans to fight them full scale. They really felt like if we attacked in France, it would lessen the troop strength of Germans I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Weaken the troop strength in the Eastern Front against Russia, would take the pressure off the war in Russia. We move east to Germany and really are only stopped briefly at the Battle of the Bulge. It gets that nickname Battle of the Bulge because the Germans' counteroffensive produced a bulge in the U.S. Lines where they pushed us back, but they never broke, and then they crushed them. By this point, by summer of 44, anybody who understood the military situation knew that it was just a matter of time, that it was a war of attrition from this point forward. So you might ask, why doesn't Hitler surrender? Well, Hitler refuses to surrender because he feels the German people had betrayed him and they don't deserve to have the war shortened, so he takes it through to the bitter end. And the Allies are happy to do that because remember, at the end of World War I, the war had never reached the home front in Germany, and so there was a feeling that they had not really lost the war. The war had not really been lost. This time the Allies were going to make sure Germany understood that she had been crushed. All right. So what about the war in the Pacific? How did the possession of colonies for Japan come back to hurt her? Now look at this map. This map shows in the red are all the places that Japan controls in 1942. That's a pretty good empire. It's got Manchuria, parts of China, all of Southeast Asia, what we're calling the Dutch East Indies here, what we call Indonesia today, much of Oceania, many of these islands. So it should have been a good thing for them, right? The problem is they take over too much land. Now, what do I mean by that? It means they've spread themselves so thin that it's hard to control all this land. Also, by attacking French Indochina, they've got the French against them. Attacking what was then known as Siam and Burma, we've got the British against them. You've got the Chinese against them, the Manchurians against them, the Koreans against them, the Dutch down here, and all the native peoples. Now, initially, this is an interesting story. Initially, these colonies are glad to see the Japanese. They see the Japanese as liberators from their European oppressors. The problem is, and that's what I mean by number two, the problem is that they are quickly seen as being worse. Yes, worse than the Europeans. The Japanese are worse. They're harsher. They're more cruel. It's bad. The Japanese, though, went to these places because they needed natural resources and raw materials and forced labor. The problem is that by being so cruel in these places, they actually lead to greater resistance movements, which requires even more soldiers, more resources, and they face guerrilla warfare. These guerrilla forces throughout South and East Asia harass the Japanese, and they're willing to coordinate with their former colonial masters, the British, the Americans, and in some cases the French and the Dutch. but mostly the British and the Americans. They're willing to coordinate with them. So this will help to lead to the Japanese downfall.